Welcome to Between the Covers, the show for readers and writers and lovers of books. I'm Stephanie, and I'm a publisher at Red Penguin Books, where we publish books of all types and genres. So whether you have a book in your head, a manuscript ready to go, or maybe even 300 sheets of loose leaf shoved in a drawer, please visit redpenguinbooks.com and unleash your inner author. I'm so excited today to be joined by three authors who have definitely unleashed themselves, and you're going to love meeting them. JP McLean is the author of Bloodmark. Katherine Lawrence, the author of Stay. And finally, Alice Ivinya is the author of Feathers of Snow. But first, let's hear about Bloodmark. Our author writes, abandoned at birth, life has always been a battle for Jane Walker. She and her best friend, Sadie, spent years fighting to survive Vancouver's cutthroat underbelly. That would have been tough enough without Jane's mysterious afflictions, an intricate pattern of blood-red birthmarks that snake around her body, and vivid, heart-wrenching nightmares that feels so real, she wakes up screaming. Please welcome with me author Joanne McLean. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, it's a pleasure. It's terrific to be here with you and Katherine and Alice.
I am so captivated by that description. My goodness. What on earth inspired that storyline? I'm always intrigued, and yours especially. Waking up screaming, birthmarks wrapping around her body. Where did you get these ideas? You're so creative.
I love supernatural ever since I was a kid. Well, it wasn't a kid precisely. And I read John Wyndham's The Chrysalids. Ever since then, anything to do with supernatural, paranormal has just caught my interest. And this particular book was inspired by the opening scene of a television program called Bloodspot. And in that opening scene, a duffel bag has been dropped into the middle of Times Square. Times Square has been cleared of people, and a bomb tech is approaching the bag, kneeling in front of it, when this arm shoots up out of the bag and someone inside zippers it open and stands up, and it's a woman, and she's covered in tattoos from the neck down. She doesn't know who she is, why she got the tattoos, when or why she's doing it, what she's doing in Times Square. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, what must it be like to live your life with these markings that weren't of your choosing and that you can't hide? Although in some of the scenes she is able to hide them with makeup, but it seemed to me a very invasive thing to have to manage your life around. And so that's where the idea started. And of course, then it just grew from there and turned into Bloodmark.
Wow, what a scene and what an inspiration. You're right. What does that feel like to not know why you are a certain way?
And in this book, she's grown up with these marks. So she's abandoned at birth, grows up in the system. So she's raised in group homes, and she learns to live with the marks by hiding them, because as a kid she's ostracized and bullied because of them, as you can imagine. So she's about 25 years old when these marks slowly start to disappear. So she's thrilled. Life is looking good for Jane Walker. That is until she delivers flowers in her day job one day. She's out at the university and delivers flowers, and she drops a glove that she had covering the mark on the back of her left hand. And when the professor sees the mark is also in a print on his wall, and he recognizes the mark. And he's the one that ends up telling her that that is not a birthmark, it's a blood mark, and it's protecting you. And the fact that it's disappearing is very troublesome, because once it's gone, she won't have any protection left from the people or person or thing she's been protected from.
Wow. I love that whole flip right there. That's something that has been a thorn in your side, shall we say, for your whole life, suddenly becomes that which you're wishing, I wish I could hold on to this thing a little bit longer. That I think that's a very human reaction. Don't we kind of run hot and cold with things that, maybe whether it's a personality trait or even, something in your house. How often do we throw away the trash and then 10 minutes later we need something?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I always say, as soon as I throw, my husband is always, let's clear out the basement. Oh, I'm going to need all that stuff as soon as I do it.
That's exactly what happens the very next day.
My goodness. So tell me a little bit about your writing. When you're writing, you had this inspiration, shall we say, from way back when. You've always had a passion for paranormal. You got this little inkling of an idea. Did it all flow at once? Did it kind of build and even you didn't know? I mean, did you start and not really know where that blood mark was going to go?
Well, Bloodmark is my ninth book. So I've got a pattern that I laid out. Now, with the very first book I wrote, I was total pantster, total pantster. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was having fun. So I just went with it, had fun. And that's my motto today. If I don't have fun, then there's something wrong with
I
it.
love that. That's a great
Yeah.
motto to have.
So this book, Bloodmark, was the first book in a brand new series. So I was breaking out of a mold, saying goodbye to a family I knew very well with the other series of books. So it was fun and fresh to start a new series, new book, new characters, new storyline, completely different idea than the other one. So it was a real challenge. I changed my writing from first person to third person, and that was fun to do, and a challenge as well. And I also changed it to a three-person perspective instead of just the one person's perspective. So all of that was fun. And I write full time. I use writing as my chocolate bar. It's my reward. So if I know I have something that I have to do, whether it's weeding or vacuuming, I do that first so that I can get to my writing and do my fun thing after.
Oh my goodness. I love that. That's a dual wonderful thing, that the writing is the chocolate bar, but also you're a full-time writer. And that is the dream for so many people. So congratulations on that. Uh,
Thank you. I'm very lucky. Very lucky.
Doing that which you love, which is just so wonderful. Now I'm very intrigued because you made some serious decisions here about changing your writing after being a successful novelist for many, many books to suddenly go from from first person to third person, from one point of view to three points of view. Did you make that decision in conjunction with, okay, I've got this storyline and I'm hearing it in third person, or was it more like, uh, the time has come, 8 books later, I'm going third person. What should I write? How
I,
does this all work? That's a lot.
I wanted a challenge for one thing, so that I like challenges. That was one. But I also wanted to explore if it was easier to tell the story and tell more aspects of the story than just from the first person. Because one of the limiting factors of the first person is it's imperfect information. You only get that one person's perspective, and every other piece of information you've got to bring in through something that that person observes or is told to that person or that person overhears. So I wanted to see how it worked when you could bring in two other characters to fill out the plot and to show the parts of the story that you weren't aware of. When I wrote the first book, after I got to about the fourth one in the series, um, I stopped writing that series and wrote the first book from a different character's perspective. And that was a fascinating project. I absolutely loved it. I stripped everything out except for the dialogue between those two characters and built the story out again from the man's perspective. And that kind of tweaked me to thinking how, when I say something to you in a conversation, you could be hearing that in a completely different context, and it could mean something completely different to you than what I've said. And so writing with these three characters gave me the opportunity to show how the boyfriend reacted to what she said and how her best friend reacted to what she said. And oftentimes there's the miscommunication that makes the story more fun.
Absolutely. And isn't that the way life goes? When someone is telling me about what's going on in their life and it's a problem with the boyfriend or whatever, I recognize that I'm only hearing half the story.
So true.
I'm only hearing what she's saying, and I'm sure that the boyfriend or whatever has a totally different view on it. And how insightful as an author to realize I was only telling half the story, and let me tell the other half.
Yeah, and it's been fun. I've enjoyed it. I think it's been a real eye opener, and I feel like because the book has done so well, I feel like I can now comfortably go back to first or stay in third, as long as I continue to tell a really interesting story and use all the tools that are available for doing that.
Right, right. So you made these decisions. I want to try this new writing technique, for lack of a better word. And I'm ready to write Bloodmark, and they just happen to converge. So this was the first book in that way.
I,
Was there?
I tested the theory with a short story.
Oh, good, good. I like that.
Yeah, and when I was comfortable with the short story, I thought, okay, I can do this, and I'm gonna do the new book in this fashion and see how it goes. I thought it might be my new norm, but as it turns out, I really do like first person. I may go back to it. I'm thinking about going back to it, but I will stick with third person for all of the Bloodmark books. There's going to be 3 of them in the series.
Okay, so all of those will be in third person. Very interesting that you recognize it's got all of these positives. I really like it. I could do it, pat on the back. But you know what? I'm keeping my options open. I might go back after the series is finished. I think that's a huge statement for you. And I love that as far as giving permission. Here you are, a successful author now in these 2 different veins, and even you would agree, you know what? One is not better than the other. If you're writing in first person, it's not like, you're a weenie, you can't manage more storylines than that. No, you're a successful author saying both have a lot of merits, and I reserve the right in the future to go on both sides of that fence.
That's right. That's right. It's if you've got 3 interesting characters, you can tell 3 interesting stories. Just weave them all together.
Right.
And that's what I've done with
And
these.
that's what you've done. So there are 3 more books in the Bloodmark series.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me something, and I'm always intrigued. When you write that first book, do you know that there were going to be 3? Did you kind of figure that out as you were writing it? You said, wow, there's more to come. How do you...
It's interesting. When I wrote the first series, which ended up to be 7, it was a one-off. It was definitely one-off. And then as I got further into it, into the marketing part of it, I started thinking about the characters and knew that it could go further. So I started writing some ideas down. I realized I probably had 2 books, maybe 3. So I rebranded it a trilogy. That was a mistake. So then as I was writing the 3rd book, I knew, oh, there's no way. This is going to be at least 4 or 5 books. And so I rebranded it again and called it The Gift Legacy.
Right.
And it ended up with 7 books. So when I say that I started off and this was a one-off, in the back of my head, I was thinking, there's 2 here, probably 3. So that's what I'm saying for today. But my math is not good.
Joey, you are such a delight, and that is such a relief to know that you could start it out. Sometimes I'm so fortunate to interview hundreds of authors, and sometimes they're so sure. I knew there were 10 books in that. Wow, you knew that? I think I can empathize a little more with you. I thought there was more. There was a lot more. I kept branding. Wow. I'm absolutely loving that. Such a pleasure. I do want to mention again to all of our viewers, Bloodmark by JP McLean, and you can see more at jpmcleanauthor.com. Certainly the other 8 books, the other series, more things to come, and there's going to be plenty more. So please head on over to Joanne's website, sign up so you get announcements, and you can keep up with all this. And you too can be reading third person, first person. There's a lot more writing going on there. So Joanne, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Our next author, Katherine Lawrence, is the author of Stay, and Stay is the winner of the Moonbeam Children's Book Award for Children's Poetry. And our author writes, Millie is 11 going on 12 when her life is upended by her parents' decision to separate. Her mother gets a new boyfriend and her father moves into a new place, an apartment with a big sign on the door that says, "No dogs allowed." Since there's nothing Millie wants more than a dog of her own, that seems like the biggest blow of all. Hoping to get her parents back together, not just for her sake, But for the sake of her future dog, Millie is elated when her father moves back in after a short while. She can't understand why her parents aren't happy at the reconciliation until she learns the truth. Her father is back because he has been diagnosed with cancer. Told in verse by acclaimed Canadian poet Katherine Lawrence, Stay is a moving, touching, and yet often humorous portrait of a family in a time of crisis, whose pain is filtered through the thoughts and actions of an 11-year-old. Stay captures the essence of what it means to grow up, confront your fears, support your family, and share in the wild optimism that only youth can harbor. I'm so delighted to introduce award-winning poet Katherine Lawrence. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, absolutely. And oh, what a moving topic there. My goodness. I from the dog to the bigger, the bigger. So tell us a little bit about your poetry. Stay is certainly not your first, but what is the inspiration behind Stay? Was it a personal project, or were you just touched by this thought?
No, all my work is personal. Stay is a novel in verse, and I had written 3 other poetry collections for adults when I happened to read the award-winning Out of the Dust, an American novel in verse by Karen Hess, and it was published in 1997, I believe. And I was absolutely enthralled by the genre, the novel in verse. And I thought, as a poet, I've just got to wrap my head around this. So I studied the genre, and then I began to explore the topic that I come back to again and again and again, which is divorce from the perspective of a child, divorce from the perspective of all the many players. I'm just very interested in keeping the so-called divorce narrative going through all perspectives. And so Stay took me many, many years to write. I actually wrote another collection of poetry while I was working on the puzzle that is Stay. So every poem in Stay speaks to or connects with the next poem. So readers just keep moving through the book because it reads like a novel, but every page is a discrete poem. So for example, here's the poem called Punctuation, if I may.
Please.
I've got the longest ponytail in class, a blonde question mark curling my spine. If my hair could ask, would mum brush and comb the answer, or sweep my suspicions into an updo, or braid and tie another lie? So
That's so good.
nice reaction, Joanne. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that was amazing.
So Millie is a snoop. She's reading her mother's text messages, and that's how she finds out that her mother's having an affair. So I think kids are like animals, like they just sense what's going on. So something's up. She's snooping around, keeping her eyes and her nose sharp, and so she keeps asking questions. Her confidant is her twin who died at birth, so she often goes to the cemetery and just has these heartfelt talks with Billy. I introduced that idea to just give the collection, another voice and more texture. So this is how the book proceeds. So she's got many, many challenges. She's of course, very self-centered. She's 11 years old. She wants a dog. She's torn. And at the same time, her parents are divorcing. She's heartbroken. How does she get everything she wants? Then dad gets sick. And so as Alice and Joanne know full well, you always have to be giving your protagonist hurdles. They always have to hit the wall, or the book just stalls. So trying to do that through poetry was a really, really fun challenge.
Oh my gosh. And I'm so glad you read the poem that you did, because I was going to ask about the poems themselves, if and that one obviously did it. It stands alone.
Yeah, they do.
So when you have a novel in verse, you have this, juxtaposition of wanting to support the storyline, yet stand each individually. And that example certainly did. I mean, which is why the reaction.
So, right. So then everybody can appreciate the challenge as a poet, as a writer of any genre. I've also just published a new collection of adult poetry called Black Umbrella, and even though it's for the older readers, and again it looks at the breakdown of family, the overall sweep of the collection is a novel in its thrust and its tone. So all the works, one piece speaks to the next, not as deliberately as Stay. But I love to tell a story in this way.
Oh, it's beautiful. Have you ever felt in telling the story that, this feeling of, goodness, I need to fill in a little bit here so the reader knows what happened. It's not really poetic. I kind of want to just throw in a little note at the bottom. Is there ever any time that you're kind of stuck with that, scene change? Hi, everyone. Here's what just happened. And it's not as poetic as some other things. Is that ever a problem with novel in verse?
Well, it's a good question, and it's a tough question, Stephanie. I'm going to answer it by saying that I put tremendous trust in the detail, the telling detail. So if a line or a stanza isn't working, then usually it means that I haven't come up with the precise image that's going to work on multiple levels, because with any kind of good writing, the subconscious needs to be in touch with the conscious mind. That's the play back and forth. And my experience is that the image is what's going to be the conduit and fill in those blanks for the reader. So I have to trust the image and trust the reader. And also I put huge faith in white space, that really important breath between stanzas that gives the mind a chance to catch up to where the piece is going.
Right. Oh, I love that, because it is a problem in a lot of different art forms of making sure that our reader or watcher, if it's a viewer, if it's a movie, whatever it might be, to make sure that they are progressing through the storyline. And to do that with a novel in verse, I love that you're using white space, that you are making sure that, like you said, the detail, if it's not working, it's just, poetry has so much weighing on every single word. I always say of the forms, a novelist, you got, 90,000 words there. If some were good, some were less than stellar, you still could have a solid, fabulous novel. And this is in no way I meant meaning as an insult to any novelist out there, but Hemingway's got some really crummy lines in there, and it's fine. There's a lot of stuff. Poets don't actually have as much leeway, and the way you described your attention to detail really kind of hammered that home, that poets think of language in a very different way than novelists do.
Well, I think that we learn from each other, because I certainly have pulled in all the tricks from the novelist's toolkit. And I know that good novelists are very, very sensitive to language and to finding the right words. And I know that lots and lots of novelists do what I do with poetry, which is, I'll read a poem out loud, 20, 30, 40 times, and use the breath to try to help me figure out where it's going and find its energy and keep it alive, because an oral form.
The way you described a novel in verse, and there are many novelists who consider themselves, even if they're not writing in verse, it was poetry, and all of that attention which you're obviously paying to it, which is just so amazing. So great. You mentioned that you keep going back to that theme of divorce, whether it's in the children or whether it's with the adults, and making sure that you are with that theme.
That's I'm a one-trick pony, Stephanie. I've got one overriding obsession. I'm really, really interested in the family. Like, why do some families just tick, and why do some families fall apart? And how does the contemporary family reconfigure? So Stay is the story of a contemporary family. Dad gets cancer, he has surgery, and mom, reaches for her better self. And dad comes home and he sets up camp in a separate room so that the family can provide him with the post-op care that he needs. And then at the end, Millie doesn't get all her wishes come true. Dad goes back to his apartment, but the family is civil.
Yes.
They have figured out how to get along with each other. Sorry?
Well,
Does she get a dog? That's the most important thing.
She does. She gets a dog. There's all kinds of complications around the dog, of course. The dog's a major.
Of course. Well, what I love about what you're doing is, families are, the word family means a lot of things nowadays. And it certainly, even you might say on paper, my focus is divorce, but actually the focus is on the fact that family sometimes means that the parents are together and we get that happily ever after. And sometimes it means, well, I guess me and the dog have to go back and forth, Yeah,
a family can mean, a single person and his or her, constellation of friends, a chosen family. So I love the fluidity that has entered the language with respect to family.
Absolutely. And by focusing on divorce, which, too often is seen as an event that happens, but in actuality, the focus is on the family, as you were describing, that you're so intrigued and have always been by what makes the family.
Right. And my parents divorced when I was Millie's age. That's why at the outset of our conversation, I said, it's personal. It comes from experience. And then I also throw in lots of fictional devices as well.
Of course. Well, I love your focus, and whether it is for your young readers, like for Stay, or for your older readers, too many of us need to be reading a little more about the family, because we need to know that there's more than one way.
That's right. I'll just wrap us up with a concluding poem that's uplifting. I don't want to be a downer here. And so this is to Alice's question. Millie has a puppy, and this is called Memory Work. The puppy's name is Ruby. Yesterday, Ruby fell asleep in my lap, one front paw patched over her eye, the other tucked under her rabbit soft chin. I petted all my favorite parts: satin ears, velvet tummy, pink and black marbled toe pads, each one a pearl button, tiny sweat glands on her feet, my hands memorizing the softness of pup.
Oh, very sweet.
We're all relieved she got the dog.
I know. The girl gets her dog.
What kind of dog was it?
A yellow lab.
Oh, perfect. I've got a yellow lab.
Oh, well, for all of our viewers, please visit katherinelawrence.net or just grab your copy of Stay, for young readers, for older readers. And there's something there for all of us to know about what makes a family. And truly, it can be different for every person, but there's lots of different ways to have a successful family.
That's right. Thank you, Stephanie.
Our next author, Alice Ivinya, is the author of Feather of Snow. And our author writes, in Brianna's new world of ice and snow, the coldest things by far are the eyes of her betrothed. Brianna bears a deadly secret. She is not the princess she is pretending to be. If the prince finds out, her life will be forfeit and her country plunged into war. But there is more to the icy prince than meets the eye, and Brianna slowly unravels the secrets of his dark past while surviving in a strange culture. However, her goodness and wit will only get her so far. Terrifying beasts stalk the border, and a murderer is at work in the town. They know the truth of Brianna's identity and will stop at nothing to destroy all she has fought for. Please welcome author Alice Ivinya. Alice,
Thank you.
so glad to have you here.
I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, absolutely. And wow, the princess who's something in disguise, but yet so is the prince, huh? Not the usual girl meets boy, finds out he's a prince trope.
No, it's the other way around, I suppose.
That seems to be all the trope nowadays. Every time I turn on the TV, someone is marrying a prince. It makes it look like you walk down the street and there are tons of princes in disguise just waiting for us. So tell me about this storyline and what inspired this book.
Yeah, so Feathers of Snow is based on a Grimm fairy tale, The Goose Girl, which a lot of people aren't that familiar with, but it was actually my favourite fairy tale growing up. I must have read it when I was about 7 or 8, which, considering some of the gruesome details in this fairy tale, is slightly worrying, I suppose, but I didn't think they were that disturbing at the time. But yes, so it's a retelling of The Goose Girl, apart from I switched the roles of the maid and the princess of it, because I thought that it made a bit more of an interesting story that I wanted to tell rather than just saying the original.
Very nice.
It's great fun.
Is that something you've done before, retelling fairy tales, or was this your first one?
Yes. Yeah, I've done a few now. So there's this trilogy, and then the book I wrote before it was Silent Melody, which is a retelling of the Pied Piper, which was also a huge amount of fun, and had many challenges as well. And
you were quite the precocious reader as a child, if you were reading all tell me a little bit about growing up reading all of these fairy tales that maybe you were not supervised about.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where things that disturb you as an adult tend to just be fine as a child. You just don't realize that they're so weird. And I think definitely since becoming a mum, I've become much more disconcerted by even Disney. Like, I can't watch half the Disney movies anymore where all the parents die. So in the original Goose Girl, there are a few quite disturbing moments, such as a talking horse head that's been severed and hung up on a wall, and the main villain is killed at the end by being dragged in a barrow of nails behind a horse. And so it's gruesome, and they were both, I had a child's version of this story, and those facts were still in there, but I just didn't know at the time. They stuck in my mind, but they weren't as bad as I think they appeared now. And then it was quite interesting writing it for a more of a mature audience, because my books are aimed at upper teenagers. Actually having to tone down some of the facts that were in my childhood book was quite funny, because I didn't let my horse's head talk. That was just way too far. Well,
isn't it funny that so many children's things used to be like, if you think of Tom and Jerry cartoons, and everyone is like killing each other, and there's a lot of things that were for younger audiences. Look at them through mature eyes. You say, was this okay for children?
Yeah, and I think it's the whole, when you're reading fairy tales, they're quite distant. You're often not in first person. You're often seeing multiple events happen in a very short period of time. So you have that distance from the character, which can make events slightly less personal, and you're often looking more for the messages behind it. Whereas when you do write something first person, there's suddenly a lot of things that are quite as I say, quite disturbing or quite hardcore to discuss from a first person point of view, of someone actually experiencing these things that are sometimes quite horrible. Which is, again, the problem I had with the Pied Piper, like just thinking, actually, this is really dark, with all these children going missing. It's not easy writing or reading at all.
And yet when you read it when you were 8, you were fine with it or whatever.
Yeah, I know. When you're 8, you're like, yeah, they all just go off and follow the Pied Piper. Yeah. But the Pied Piper is also based on a true story, which I think is also makes it much more disturbing, the fact that sort of 130 children really did go missing in Hamlin. Which, you know, you read that and you think, gosh, you know, you've got to be a bit sensitive with the material when it is actually connected to people who really existed.
And certainly when you were a young child reading the Pied Piper, or any of us, we did not know that it was based on.
Yes. Yeah.
Many people still might not know necessarily the story behind the story, and it is incredibly disturbing. Yeah. Absolutely. Do you have fairy tales that you are either looking to definitely like, oh, someday I definitely want to do this, or are there any others, perhaps not touching that one with a 10-foot pole, either direction that you're getting pulled in? Well,
I like all my fairy tales to be uplifting and full of hope, and I like my happy ever afters. So even though I have quite dark source material, I like, I mean, as I think it was Katherine said earlier, having lots of hurdles for your protagonist to overcome is a really good thing to show how your characters grow throughout the book. So yes, there's some horrible things that happen, but they always overcome them, and they always grow as a result, and then they discover who they are and how strong they are as a result. So I do like my fairy tales to be ones where I can do that through, and think that underlying there are positive messages that are important to talk about.
Right. So you're not picking any of the ones that things did not end well.
Yes, I think ones where, well, I suppose the Pied Piper things don't end well, but I give it a happy ending at the end. I can't cope otherwise with it. But I'm currently writing a fairy tale retelling of a very obscure Scottish fairy tale called The Waterhorse of Barra, which is a Scottish island, and that is about a girl and a kelpie. And I find Scottish folklore fascinating. And it's one of my favorite fairy tales, but I discovered it much later in life, and it's very short, but it's very different from a lot of the other fairy tales, and the fact that in a way it's the woman who tames the beast in it, rather than the beast kidnapping the woman, as what happens in a lot. The woman actually kidnaps the beast. So I like the role reversal of it in it, so I'm having great fun with that one.
Absolutely. So you love to read these, and that's how you're finding which one feels right on your heart for retelling. Yeah,
exactly. And what messages I can really get behind, I think, as well.
Right. Now, because you are using literary source material, do you ever find that you have to stay on a particular line with, I want to retell it, but I want to keep enough that it's recognizable? Is that a deliberate choice, or how do you manage that hurdle?
Yeah, so it's slightly different based on which retelling I've done. So, for example, with the Pied Piper, only the very beginning is the story, because it ends in a massive cliffhanger, the original fairy tale. These children disappear under the mountain next to Hamlin, and nobody ever knows what happened to them. Right. So in the story, I've got all of that exactly as the original, but then in a lot of the original fairy tales, they have a blind, a deaf and a lame person left behind. So my retelling is the deaf girl and the blind girl going to rescue the children, because the deaf girl's the only one who can't be enchanted by the Pied Piper. So in that way, I have a huge scope to do whatever I want with, because they go and follow the Pied Piper into the mountain and go and rescue the children. So I could go crazy with that. I could do whatever I wanted, because it's finishing off the original fairy tale. Whereas with the Goose Girl, I stayed closer to the source material, but with the twist of the characters. But I invented a whole world around it, and a culture that is obviously very different from the original. And I think the big challenge for me is that there's a talking horse, Falada, who's very integral to the original fairy tale. And to have I can't just have a random talking horse in a world that I want to make sense. So I had to invent a whole world where having a talking animal would make sense. The theme. So that's where a lot of my inspiration for the Goose Girl came, is just trying to make a world that made complete sense with the original fairy tale. And then the next 2 books in the trilogy go off a bit. They sort of conclude it, because the Goose Girl, if you reverse the roles, doesn't have a happy ending. And as I said before, I need my books to have.
Gotta have a happy ending. Oh, I'm all for that. I love a book with a happy ending. Now, you were mentioning what age bracket you are gearing your books towards. Is that something that you are, making a deliberate choice as you're writing? Like, okay, here's my age bracket. Can't have too much blood and guts. Tell me a little bit about your choices, writing wise, when you're considering a particular age.
Yeah, so most of my books are aimed at sort of between 15 and 18, though my biggest reader group is 30-year-olds, funnily enough. But my books are aimed at, they all love, I think I've just got 30-year-olds who just love young adult books. But so they're aimed at sort of 15 as the youngest. So I do have some violence in them. And I'm a vet, so sometimes I have to tone down. I'm just used to blood and guts all day, every day, and sometimes I have to just remind myself that most people aren't used to blood flying up the wall and stuff, as I see every day. So I try and be careful, because that's sometimes I get a little bit too dark with that side of things. But I have no language. Most of them, the romance, it stops at a kiss. I have one fade to black scene in one book. And my writing is meant to be quite accessible, very engaging and easy to read. So I use first person, and I use sort of deep perspective point of view. So it's very emotion heavy. You really, really delve deeply into the main character, so you almost feel like you are them. And that's my idea, to sort of make the reader feel like all these things are happening to them, and then so they can't stop reading, and then they want to find out what happens next. And I find that engages sort of upper teenagers the easiest.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned you're a vet, so now we know why you were so desperate to find out whether she got
Yes, I know. It's all about the dogs.
And no talking dead horses.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, are you a cat and dog kind of a vet, or are you kind of a farm vet? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm a small animal charity vet. I work for a charity and treat dogs and cats, and rabbits and guinea pigs. And
oh my goodness!
When do you find time to write as a?
It's a challenge.
And a mother.
Yes. I have a 3.5-year-old as well. So I normally write in the evenings after he's gone to bed, and I only work 3 days a week. Try and give myself some flexibility. But yeah, he goes to bed at 8 o'clock, so I normally write after that if I've got the energy, which I try to be quite disciplined about.
You'd have to be, with all that going on. Interesting that you're inspired by the fairy tales, and you're not writing, James Herriot stories of dealing with the animals or something.
I started writing a little bit of one, but I find it's very hard to get the balance right, I think, with veterinary, because there's some of the things that happen are so emotional, and a lot of people come at it from very different angles of what's right and wrong. And so it's a hard, like James Herriot does an amazing job, but also he takes the mick out of, real people. And I think that's, a lot of people wouldn't appreciate, even if you change their name, they're at all identifiable, wouldn't appreciate being in a book, I think, if you're writing from your real life experiences.
I'm sure. But after reading all those books, I wanted to be a country vet. So. That's for sure. Well, so interesting that you mentioned that your target audience and your actual readers are not necessarily the same person, because what I wanted to ask all three of you, and I'll begin with Joanne, if I were shopping today, who should I buy a copy of Bloodmark for? I've got a whole list of lots of contacts. Can you describe who I should buy Bloodmark for today?
You should buy Bloodmark for an adult, probably a female, and I would say probably between 35 and 45.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that who you were aiming for, and you got the right people reading it?
Well, it's interesting. I can't tell who is reading it except to look at my stats on who might be following me, right? And so the people who are following me, I think, trend a little bit older, because I'm older than that. So I think my immediate friends and writer friends all tend to be about about my age, so it skews a little bit higher. But it's definitely aimed for a lower audience because I made her 25 years of age.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Catherine, how about Stay? Who should I be buying a copy of Stay for today?
The little girl in your life who is between the ages of 9 and 13, and she either has direct experience with divorce in her own family, or she's got some friends who have gone through, their parents have gone through divorce, with over 50% of the population experiences divorce. It's not too difficult to find children who know something about this subject. And what I'm learning from feedback is that Stay really helps kids sort of chart the emotional landscape of family breakdown, and gives them some language and some insight into what their friends are going through.
Yeah, no, you're so right. It is 50% of our population will be affected by divorce. And so I'm so glad that you've chosen that as, if there's going to be a topic, let's go with that, because
let's talk about it. It's really important to talk about.
it is so important to talk about it, and so little actually written about it.
I know, it's crazy. I mean, the divorce I experienced was 50 years ago. And still today I meet kids who are suffering the same kind of shame and embarrassment that I experienced. So there's lots of things that don't change, sadly.
And not only was it something you experienced 50 years ago, but as a child who also experienced divorce as a kid, it still affects my life.
Of course.
The reality is, being a child of a divorced family affects your life for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
Whether it's simply, who should I call to invite over for whatever, it will definitely change it. And like you said, there's not nearly enough written about it.
I know. And why, after all this time, do I still kind of wish my parents would get back together? And that's her wish, and it's not met. But so it's realistic children's fiction.
Fabulous, thank you. And Alice, a copy of your book here, Feathers of Snow. Who should I be buying that on my list? Someone you targeted towards, or someone who's reading?
So it's appropriate for anyone, I'd say over 15, maybe if you've got a mature reader, you can go a bit younger than that. It's mostly aimed towards women, because it's very much focused on emotion within romance in there as well. Though I have had men leave positive reviews as well, if they like reading about princess romance. But yeah, I find that I do have younger teenage readers, but I have a lot of sort of stay-at-home mums in their 30s in America who love it, and I think it appeals to the sort of very easy to read, get through it quickly, sort of quite emotional escapism. I think I have that audience as well.
Fantastic. And yes, men do this too. My husband is a little bit addicted to the Hallmark Channel Girl Meets Prince, Girl Marries Prince. Every time I turn around, there's a princess movie on. So
my husband enjoys them, but he says, "Oh, I have to skip some of the icky scenes where they're talking lovey-dovey stuff."
Yes, but it's just so funny that they do appeal. So all of you, whether we think we're writing for women,
I've had men come to my readings too, and they say, "Oh, I really enjoyed that book," but they do that. I flipped through that part where it was behind the bedroom doors. I didn't want to read that. It was very uncomfortable. The women, of course, come up and say, "I want more of that."
Right, exactly.
They do. Yes, they do. Well, now we know. Maybe
we're gonna have to start writing books for the repressed men in our lives.
Well, now all of our viewers know. They've already been put in a category. They know which website to go to when they finish watching the show. I am so delighted to have all three of you, and I so look forward to hearing more about your future books. I know that there will be many, and so wonderful. So thank you so much for joining us here between the covers.
Thanks for having us.